Hi. So we're going to talk about education now. I wanted to start by taking you through some of the history of education. And those of you who are education majors or who are going into like K through 12 will know this way better than I do. So I'm just going to give you a quick kind of brief explanation of how education got to this point in the US. So in pre-modern society, education was considered something that was only for the elite or for clergy. It was considered something that you only needed if you were going to be among the highest class, or if you were going to be preaching to people or having people follow you. Then you needed an education. Everybody else, you're good. You don't need that. Um, it was what existed for the masses, meaning that what normal people had was family-based learning. So your mom, your dad, most likely your mom, sat you down and taught you things like how to count, how to write, how to speak, how to do basic math, that kind of thing. And this was completely based on social class. What two questions to think about while you think about this is how would education have been broken up based on social class? Meaning, if you're just relying on your family, how well educated can you become? Depending on, it's going to depend, of course, upon how educated your parents are, and what impact did that have on future generations? One of the kind of threads to poverty and being considered low social class, low income, poverty, whatever word you want to use, one of the common threads is the less education someone can have, the less likely they are to get themselves out of poverty or get themselves up into another social class standing. So one way that those in charge kept people poor was by not educating them or not giving them access to any way to learn other than what their families passed down to them. So take a moment and reflect. Take a moment and think about this. What was your experience when you were in K through 12? What was your life like? What were the benefits of being educated this way? What were some of the negatives? And in your own words or in your own thoughts, because you don't have to turn anything in, is think about how the US system of education compares to systems around the world. And if you can, think of any that are better, think of any that are worse. Just kind of give yourself a minute to brainstorm that. And I will sit here quietly. Okay, are you done? Good. So here's a brief history of the school system. One, what do schools do? Well, basically, what a school was there for historically was to give the right kind of environment to appropriately socialize children. Basically, to teach children to be obedient workers in some way or another. So if you think about what you learn in school, especially like the first few years, you learn basic stuff like asking permission for things that are human nature, asking permission to go to the restroom. One of the things I like to do when I teach this in class is ask folks, did your teacher ever have like a unique bathroom pass that you had to use? And maybe yours did. I really hope they did. Maybe I'll leave like a thing open in the announcements so you guys can let me know any unique stuff that your teacher used for bathroom passes or laboratory passes. Some of the stuff I've heard commonly are a yellow safety vest or orange and yellow safety vest, with like the reflective things on it. People have had to wear that. I heard a lot of prosthetic limbs, prosthetic legs, prosthetic arms, lots of like massive seashells, some other good ones. Somebody said that their teacher gave them an orange cone, like they should use when people are doing construction, and they had to carry that to the restroom with them. Um, Lots of odd stuff. Teachers are a unique breed. Uh, I'm also recording this during stay at home for coronavirus, so I'm interested to see how that's going to change when schools open, if schools open. But that was kind of the idea with the school systems, right? That like you bring in kids and you teach them how to be obedient workers, ask permission to do things that are natural, like going to the bathroom, teach them how to react to the sound of a bell, right? Get it? The bell that lets you know to change classes is no different than a bell people would use in a factory to say break time. Um, Teach them how to obey authority, right? Having someone in charge of you that you have to obey the authority of. That was kind of the purpose of education. So there's two theories when we're talking about education. One is the functionalist view of education. So this argues that educational systems fill important social needs. Number one, we're talking about socialization, occupational training, social control. What this means, or one way to think about this, is so I'm recording this in July of 2020, and the big debate right now is if schools are going to open because we're dealing with high numbers of cases of coronavirus, and what do parents do if their kids aren't in school? So there's several debates happening, but kind of the two major ones are open because parents need to be able to go back to work, and the other one is keep schools closed because we're going to just see higher rates of coronavirus, which means more people sick, which means more people can't work. There's no easy answer to this debate, right? There's no one way to handle any of this situation. But if we think about this just in terms of the functionalist view, we're talking about important social needs that are being filled, meaning that kids need a place to go during the day while their parents are at work. And if you're not familiar, daycare in the United States is insane. It's extremely expensive. I have a friend who was paying, she isn't anymore, but she was paying $900 a month for one of her children to go to daycare. And when she had her second kid, it was going to be $1,200 a month for her kid to go to daycare. That is an astronomical amount of money. And I've heard some are as low as 600 depending on where you live, but still $600 a month for a kid is a lot. It's a lot of money to be spending on daycare versus school, which is free. But when we're talking about this debate, you have a few things that play into the discussion. Number one, if you can afford to stay home with your children, right? People who can afford to stay home with their children are probably more likely to make the argument that they should be at home. Two, if you have the resources for someone else to watch your kid while you're at work, that's another part of this. So when we're talking about the functionalist view, and we're talking about this sort of debate happening right now with coronavirus, we're talking about socialization, meaning should kids go back to school so they can socialize, be with each other. Again, getting back to that job training, right? The idea that I just sort of talked about with why schools were created, and the idea of social control. Second, we have conflict theory. So conflict theory looks at the way education can be divisive. In other words, the way that education can make a particular society, can enforce certain social structures within a particular society. So, for example, here's a whole kind of laundry list of ways that conflict theory would approach education. But it would look at disparities between things like race, gender, social class, the kinds of schools that are available, tracking, which I'll talk about in a second, the resources schools have available to them, educational attainment, meaning how far you can go and how realistic that is for you. Conflict theory is very much examining the way that our education system in the US particularly is not equal, and the way that just based off of luck, where you live, what district you're in, what kind of parents you have, how much your parents have to work, don't have to work, can they afford private schools, all of that is just complete luck that gives you the upper hand here, and that's what conflict theory is looking at. Also, conflict theory says that education is one of the primary ways that we reproduce inequality. So I just said this earlier, but when we're looking at educational systems, one of the ways that it reproduces inequality is just in terms of what zip code you tend to live in. Can you afford to stay at home with your children? Can you afford to send your kids to a private school? And it tends to be one of the first ways that we see inequality happening in a society is what the school system looks like, what the school itself looks like, what kind of resources are available to teachers and students in the school. It's one of our first sort of glimpses into how a society values its children is through their education system. Okay, tracking. So tracking basically means that you all probably saw this play out, and maybe you benefited from it or didn't benefit from it. But tracking basically means that students in a school are divided based off of their ability. And you get kind of the three different levels. So you get AP students or advanced students. You get everybody who sort of falls in the middle. And then you have what's deemed special needs. students on the other end of that, meaning that these are students that need more attention than the previous two groups for whatever reason. Tracking is very arbitrary, right, for a lot of places. If you fall into the AP category, chances are you have good grades. Chances are you've got something that shows that you are advanced beyond what a teacher thinks. But even the way, if we think about how we place people into AP classes beyond scores, it is a little arbitrary in terms, and tracking will say this, it's a little arbitrary in terms of like which teachers put kids forward for this stuff, or how grades are assigned. We also think about this term that floats around right now called unconscious bias. There is this unconscious bias to put kids forward who a teacher sort of thinks fits the profile of an AP student. And similarly, as we go down the line, we see this play out with students in the middle of the pile and students who are put into the bottom. So this is tracking, dividing students based on perceived abilities. Also, we talk about functional literacy when we talk about education. So functional literacy means that you have a reading and a writing skill beyond a basic level that's sufficient. So why is this a problem? You're functional, you're literate, right? Well, it's a problem because in some schools, in some places, once you've reached this place, they say, okay, you're good. You don't need any more school, right? You can read, you can write, you can do basic math, you can go work for the family, and you're done. You don't need to keep moving. So the example of functional literacy. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about is school segregation, and I'm going to have you watch this short PBS clip on what school segregation is. While you're watching, take notes for yourself, because we can't discuss this as a class. Take notes for yourself, talk about what school segregation means now, how we see schools being segregated now in this current moment, and intersectionality. Go back to what I talked about with intersectionality with gender. How does this play out in understanding school segregation? Or if you need another way to think about it, what layers of oppression do you see? Race, class, gender, sexuality, all of those things, age, etc. All right, that's it. Bye.